will Putin go nuclear on Ukraine and on other parts of Europe? And I say that two different ways. Literally, because he put his nuclear forces on alert. And I think this is an interesting point to make right off the bat. The practical meaning of this order is kind of unclear because Russia and the U.S. typically have both their land and submarine-based nuclear weapons ready to go at all time, combat ready. The question is nuclear-capable bombers, the planes. Is he putting those, loading them up with nuclear weapons?
There is no prohibition against nuclear weapons as part of your arsenal. So when Putin did that, the United States' initial reaction was, well, he's doing this just to kind of ratchet it up, and it's more show than anything else. But you can't take anything off the table here.
International law does not explicitly prohibit recourse to nuclear weapons, but legitimate recourse to nuclear weapons is restricted because of the rule of proportionality, Jay, which means that you could use them in a fashion that is unnecessary given what your military goal may be.
Our security analysts and military analysts here in Slovakia are saying, well, it's pretty unusual move, but we cannot underestimate it just because he already fulfilled all his words, what he said, even in 2008, even in 2014, and right now.
Most experts' opinions on the Russian side, on the U.S. side, on the Western side, Eastern side.
All the intelligence.
So by the time we were talking to you today on our broadcast, that the government of Zelensky would have fallen. There would already be a puppet government in place. There might still be some skirmishes on the ground, but this would basically be over. Now we're seeing cluster bombs being used by the Russians and massive air campaigns just starting to begin. And I think even there, when we say that that Putin may have changed strategies to go to the scorched earth strategy, which was not part one. Part one, they wanted to walk in as peacekeepers and liberators. Ukrainians didn't buy that en masse. So now you have to question, what does this look like if this continues for days and days of real shock and awe? We never saw shock and awe in Ukraine.
No.
That was not shock and awe. Shock and awe is flattening cities.
The standing force with NATO is about 40,000 troops, includes Americans and the other countries, 30 countries in NATO. But what we learned was to implement Article 5. Article 4 has already been put in place, or at least been requested. Article 5 is where you have a defense of an attack on one NATO country's attack on all, and then it's called, they take a consensus to determine whether there will be military action. A consensus, by the way, has to be unanimous.
If you look at the NATO website directly, it says meaning unanimity. And usually they have this unanimity in going forward very clearly, but it is through consensus and deliberation, and each country according to his means.
Eastern NATO specifically is practically, in your words, demilitarized. Will you explain that to people?
When you see the World Bank investment chart into the military in the region, it looks like from 1990 until now it's completely almost vanished, which means like Slovakia, Czech Republic, even Poland or Hungary. These numbers are not similar when the Velvet Revolution comes by in 90s or after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So right now we are practically without any sort of military presence which can significantly resist.
Now, at the same time, you have Europe and the U.S. authorizing more weapons to go into Ukraine, more lethal force into Ukraine. Here's the issue there. How do you get it there? And if you do figure out a way to get it there, who are you going to put in harm's way to deliver those weapons to the Ukrainians? And then if it's NATO, has NATO now engaged in the war?
You also have a situation where there's questions about whether Putin has direct control over what's happening, and are his military leaders going to react to what he's saying? Or, as was a concern over the weekend, are some of these military leaders themselves, because they're failing, as it is right now, going to do something rogue? And that's where I am telling you why you got to be cautious about the whole NATO alignment here. Estonia borders Russia. Then you have Latvia borders Russia. Then you go down to Lithuania, which does not border Russia, but borders Russia's satellite, Belarus. If something were to go wrong, not even intentionally, and you had engagement there because of military transports, a lot of things could happen, because those countries might be the way in which armaments are brought into Ukraine.
While our leaders have been very clear about no U.S. troops in Ukraine, we're now talking about this expanding potentially outside of Ukraine. I mean, if Belarus sends troops in of their own, not just allowing Russian troops to go in, that's a second country involved. So you have 3 countries involved. If you've authorized all these arms that you want to get to the Ukrainians, but to get them in, you've got to have some kind of safe passage corridors, which means putting some kind of troops, whether it's NATO or someone, at risk of Russian attack, which is how you lead to the next step in a war.